Hi, I'm Pat from the Sewing Studio Fabric Superstore, and today I'm going to show you how to use your brand new BabyLock Pathfinder embroidery only machine. In this video, I'm going to go over the accessories included with the machine, the embroidery features of this machine, and other important points to get you embroidering on your new machine in no time. Let's get started. Now I'm going to go over the included accessories that come with your machine. First of all, it comes with a quick reference guide, and this actually is quite valuable. It has some assistance in the beginning as to the steps for embroidery, and then it lets you know as you flip through it like this all the fonts that are included, and then we get into the actual embroidery designs that are built into the machine, and it gives you the color stitch out and how long the design takes to stitch out. So this is very handy to have. And then of course it comes with a manual that I have over here, the instruction and reference guide. It also has a lot of accessories. It comes with your 5x7 hoop and the grid to help with positioning. And it also comes with a large hoop, the 8-inch by 12-inch hoop. It's a large embroidery field with your grid for assistance in positioning. It comes with a couple of packages of embroidery needles, a USB cord if you want to direct connect your embroidery machine to your computer to send over designs. You can do that with this cord. Comes with 3 different sizes of spool caps according to what size of spool you're using on your machine. And then it comes with something that gets overlooked a lot with your mini spool cap, which actually slides into your cone. And it's very important to use this because it does add stability to your embroidery cone as opposed to a spool of thread. Of course, it comes with extra bobbins, and it uses class 15 bobbins. It comes with an optional bobbin work case. So bobbin work is a very different type of embroidery. Some people call it upside down embroidery. The Pathfinder has a category for bobbin work designs, and so it's a little different, and you would need to use this bobbin case, switch out from the one that comes with the machine and slide this one in the machine. So that's only for bobbin work. It also comes with this little black, like an embroidery cover or plate. Let me put it down here so you can see what that looks like. This little plate is to snap in if you're having issues with your embroidery and your machine. If you were having tension issues on the top of your machine, of your design, if say your thread, your top embroidery thread was looping a little bit on the top and you feel like you're doing everything right, you could go ahead and snap this in. It has a couple of little prongs on the bottom, and you can see that this would go over the opening for your needle. So you can snap this in, and what it does is that it lifts the height on top of your bobbin case, and it kind of fills in the space. It's like a little beveled edge, so it's like a little riser. And so you should get, hopefully if you're having an issue with your top embroidery thread where you get the occasional loop, this should solve the problem, but make sure you take it off when you're done. Okay, you also get a pair of scissors. Moving along here, I have a little spacer. A lot of people always wonder, what is this little thing? It's the size of a bobbin, and it actually goes in your bobbin case. I'm going to put it down here so you can see it better. So if you were to use an L class bobbin, which is this one, as opposed to your class 15 bobbin that comes with your machine, you can see that the L class bobbin is not as high as the class 15 bobbin. I hope you can see that on camera. So this one is not as high. So if I wanted to use an L-class bobbin in my bobbin case, what I would do is I would take my spacer and put this in my bobbin case in my machine, and then I would put this on top. And so now this is what it looks like. And now this is equal to the height of my class 15 bobbin. Okay, moving along here. I have a little screwdriver, a disc screwdriver, which is very handy. And then I have two other, a medium and a larger screwdriver. I have a seam ripper and a little brush. I have a mesh to use on my slippery threads if your thread is sliding off the spool. You can use a mesh on there. I have a stylus for my screen. I have a sensor pen. The sensor pen I'm going to show you how to use a little bit later on, but the sensor pen is super handy for positioning your embroidery designs accurately and easily in your hoop. And then also the sensor pen holder comes with the machine, and we actually have that on the Pathfinder right now. Then I have a roll of stabilizer. I have a little pouch to put away my accessories in. I have a dust cover. And of course, there's a little felt spool that comes in there that I have on the machine. The little felt pad actually goes onto your spool holder underneath your spool of thread. And the last thing that I just wanted to touch on before we move on is I wanted to just show you some needles here. We always get a lot of questions about what kind of needle do I use on my machine. So for embroidery, our best-selling needle is the Schmetz embroidery needle. And you can get it in an assorted package. This one that I have here in my right hand is an assortment of size 11 and 14. Size 11 embroidery needles are the most popular size that we sell. And you would use the 14 if you wanted to embroider on something that's a little bit heavier. The organ embroidery titanium needles, these that I have in my left hand, this big green package, are very, very popular too. Titanium needles run very well at high speed, so they don't heat up. So if you're maybe having thread breaks or some issues, or even if you're not, these are the needles that we often troubleshoot with. So we have these on our notions wall too. Now let's talk about some of the optional accessories that you can purchase for your machine. I think that sometimes the optional accessories get a little overlooked, and some of them are really cool to use and you will enjoy having them. If you refer to your manual where it says included accessories, if you turn the page, you'll see the list of optional accessories. And I'm not going to go over all of them because there are quite a few. I'm going to tell you which ones I like. So there's a 2-spool vertical thread stand. I like using cones of thread for embroidery. So I like to put my 2-spool thread stand on my machine, and it actually attaches to the machine. What you would do is just take the cover off, take your 2-spool thread stand and snap it in the back of the machine. There's also an optional 10-spool thread stand. So not to confuse you, it doesn't mean that if I put 2 spools of thread on a 2-spool thread stand, you're going to be able to run those 2 threads or 10 threads. Some people get confused by that. But it just means that if you have an embroidery design and you have 8 different colors of embroidery thread that you're going to use, and you have a 10-spool thread stand, you can set them all up and be really organized about it. And so it'll make the process of embroidering faster because you'll have them right at your fingertips here. Okay, now I omitted to tell you that in the included accessories comes a small single vertical spool holder or cone holder. So this, if you want to use it, you would put it on your machine right here. It just snaps in on your bobbin winder. So now you could use your cone vertically instead of horizontally. So let's go over some of the other accessories that are optional for your machine. You could purchase the 6x6 frame and hoop. So if you're a quilter and you enjoy doing quilt blocks in the hoop, the 6x6 comes very in handy. You've also got a tiny little 1 inch by 2.5 inch. That hoop is popular if you like doing monograms, because remember, if you're embroidering a very small design like a monogram, it's nice to have a small hoop because it holds your fabric and creates a better tension for you to be more successful and have less puckering in your embroidery. So also the 4x4 is popular. What I say about hoops is bigger isn't always better. You need the right size hoop for the project that you're doing, for the embroidery design that you're doing. You'll notice that I have the embroidery foot with the LED light on my machine. This comes as an included accessory with the machine, and it's a really nice foot to use. When we get into embroidery, I'm going to talk about that a little bit more, but the actual foot connects to the machine, and I have a little LED drop light to help me with positioning. So that does come with the machine. Now let's go down here, the optional accessories. If you wanted to use a USB mouse, you could use a mouse and connect it to your machine on the side. You need to have room to be able to use it, and it works well with a mouse that has the cord, not a cordless mouse, so you would want to connect it. Now let me take another look here. What else do we have? There's also a continuous, what they call a border embroidery frame. If you enjoy doing a lot of continuous embroidery or pattern connect, there is an optional hoop that is also available for that for purchase. To wind the bobbin, first of all, what I'm going to do is lift the lid of the Pathfinder machine, and I'm going to give it just a little gentle tug up, and you can see the cover slides right off. So if you don't want to have to lift your cover up and down while you're embroidering, you can just take it off and set it behind the machine. When you want to put it back on, you would just do the reverse, slide it in there, and snap it back in there. For now, I'm going to leave it behind the machine. I have a cone of embroidery thread. This is 40 weight embroidery thread, and to hold it properly on my spool holder, I am going to use the little spool holder cap. That's an included accessory, and people wonder what you do with this. So what you do is you slide it in and into your cone, and see how nice that grips now. So when you're winding the bobbin or you're embroidering with this thread, it's holding it nice and firm on your spool holder, as opposed to using a wide spool cap, which may cause issues. Okay, so now we are going to follow the thread path that's on top of the machine to wind your bobbin. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to snap it underneath this hook, then I'm going to come around and I'm going to wind it around here, and then I'm going to come straight over to my bobbin, and I'm going to wind it about 5-6 times around, and then there's a little groove down there that has a little blade in it, so I can actually cut my thread right there. And now I'm ready to wind it once I have snapped that in. This appears on my screen. So what is this? I have a start here and a close. I don't want to close my window out. What I want to do is start winding my bobbin. So I would press that. But first of all, I want to explain this to you. This machine has a speed control at which you can wind your bobbin. So if I was wanting to wind maybe monofilament thread on my bobbin, or a tricky thread, maybe something that stretches or is delicate, I can actually control the speed at which my bobbin winds by touching the minus sign, or I can speed it up. So I am going to speed it up. I'm going to press start, and my bobbin is going to start to wind, and it will stop once it's full. Or if I don't want to fill a bobbin, I can just press stop at any time if I feel I have enough thread on there, and that would stop it. I'm going to go ahead and stop it because I want to talk to you about one more thing. These, we sell pre-wound bobbins from Filtech, the Clear Glide Class 15 bobbins, which is what your machine uses. And these are pre-wound with 60 weight thread. With an embroidery machine, generally what you're going to use is 60 weight bobbin thread on the bottom and 40 weight machine embroidery thread on the top. So these pre-wound bobbins are very popular in embroidery, so feel free to use them. Here I have one open. But if you were embroidering on a towel, for instance, where you're going to see the back of the embroidery, you might want to use the same color or wind the bobbin the same color as the front so that you don't have white bobbin thread on the back. So it's up to you. To insert the bobbin, first of all, I'm going to slide over the little tongue, and it pops the top cover off my bobbin case. And I'm going to take my pre-wound bobbin with the thread coming off like the letter P. I'm going to drop it in. If you forget the way the bobbin thread goes, there's actually a little diagram up here on the throat plate that shows you in what direction. Now once you've dropped your bobbin in your bobbin case, you can just gently pull your thread back and it falls into the threading path. So you go up the hill, down the valley, and then there's a little blade down here. You can just very gently cut, and it cuts your thread, and now you can put your cover, snap your cover back on, and you're ready to embroider. To thread my machine, I'm going to put my cone of embroidery thread on my spool holder. I have my little mini spool holder here. I'm going to go ahead and slide that on. Whenever you thread a machine, you always need to make sure that your needle is in the highest position, and you also want to know that your presser foot is in the highest position. So I have mine, both of mine, in the highest position. So now I'm going to follow the threading path of the machine, which is very easy. First of all, I'm going to come underneath this, and I'm going to loop around. The whole path is numbered. So this is number 3 here. So I'm going to come up, and it'll go in there. And then I'm going to come down, and you'll see this is 3, 4, 5, 6 is the little hook that's above my needle. Sometimes you need a little bit of tension to get your thread in there. So sometimes what I do is I hold my thread, and then I just snap it in there, and then I release. Make sure that your thread goes back into the proper thread path. So number 6 is threaded. Now number 7 is bringing it up to my needle threader, which this machine has a guaranteed never miss automatic needle threader. And as long as your needle is always in the highest position, your needle threader will always work. So here we go. Number 7 is up here. And so I'm going to slide my thread in. And again, if you need a little bit of tension, if you're working with slippery thread, you may want to just hold your thread here to give it a little bit of tension so it goes in there properly. So now I have a thread cutter behind here. So I'm going to swipe my thread behind it and cut. And now I'm going to come over here, and with my stylus, I'm going to select my needle threader, and you can see that it comes down and my machine is threaded. To attach your embroidery arm, always make sure that you switch your machine off. Then you would take your arm and gently slide it on and just give it a little gentle push right at the end, and you'll hear the click where it engages. To remove your embroidery arm, you would also want to make sure that your machine is in the off position, and all you would do is put your hand underneath here, and you'll feel that there's a clip underneath there. So you would just gently press it towards you and give it a little tug, and it pulls right off. Now, I want to show you how to attach your hoop to your machine. This is a very easy hoop system, which is one of the things that is very popular about this machine. So these hoops just slide into the arm. You have to be a little bit gentle with them. You want to make sure that your hoop is flat and level when you go to slip it on. And another thing that you should do is just put your finger behind this gray arm here that you're sliding into so that it helps support. And as you gently push this in, you're also holding this in place so you're not jamming it backwards. So just slide it in until it doesn't go any further, and then it has a little lock here that you can lock down, and your hoop is ready to go. So let's start by looking at the settings of the Pathfinder. First of all, I'm going to show you what this little button does. When I touch this, it gives me a message, and I'm going to say OK. And what the machine is going to do is move my arm out of the way, because I may want to work under the needle, or maybe I want to change the needle and that arm was in my way. So that's a pretty handy little button to use there. Okay, so next we're going to travel down a little bit further on the screen, and there's a clock. If you want to set the time on your machine, you would touch the clock. The next button here puts the machine to sleep. So if you want to change your needle, you want to just put your machine to sleep, go ahead and just touch that, and it goes dormant just like a computer, and when you want to wake it up again, you can wake it up. So moving along to the left, there's a question mark. So this is where there's a lot of information right at your fingertips that you can reference instead of having to maybe search for your manual if you have a question. So I always encourage everybody to go in here and touch the buttons and see what's hidden behind here. So for instance, if I select embroidery and I select that button, I've got pages and pages of information very easily accessible right at my fingertips. And whenever you're done with a screen, just close it out. So this is if you have questions about the machine. I'm going to go ahead and close that out. Okay, so the last one along here looks like a piece of paper with writing. So this is very important to go in there. This is where you can customize the settings on your machine to the project that you're doing. Now, having said that, it doesn't mean that every time that you embroider something, you need to go in there and change everything around. You don't have to change anything if you don't want. But some of these features are really nice to adjust. So on page 1 of 7, the first thing I have is needle position up or down. So I can select whether I want, when the machine stops, my needle to be down or up. The needle position stitch placement. This is something that I don't use very often, but you need to know that it's there. So when I switch this on and I touch my needle down position, my little button next to the thread cutter on the front of the machine, it's going to drop my needle down, but not all the way down. It's going to drop it down one level, and then if I touch it again, my needle down position, it's going to drop it another level before it goes all the way down. So don't leave this switched on. But what that does for me, or how that helps me, is if I want to know exactly, very precisely, where my needle is going to enter my fabric, I can use that. I can go in there, switch that setting on, drop my needle without it entering my fabric, but I'm more accurately looking at where that needle is going to go in. But remember, switch it off if you're not going to, when you're finished using it. Okay, so the next one coming down from that is the upper and bobbin thread sensor. You want to have that on because you want to know when your bobbin is running low on thread, right? You want it to alert you and tell you that it only has a little bit of bobbin thread left. What I always recommend and what I always do is that if I'm going to start on a big project, I always put a new pre-wound bobbin in there, and then if I only have a bobbin with maybe a quarter of filled, I take it out and I stash it up here, and I'll use that bobbin that's maybe a quarter full for a smaller project. So always make sure you have enough bobbin thread. So then the question is, why would you switch the bobbin thread sensor off? So once in a while, you may want to, believe it or not, you may want to embroider without any thread. When would you want to do that? The only occasion that I've really used it is when I wanted to create perforations on cardstock. I was making cards, and rather than stitch with thread on my cardstock, I had like a lacy frame or border, and I just wanted to pierce it. So I switched my bobbin sensor off. I put my cardstock in my hoop on top of cutaway stabilizer, and I used that feature. Now remember, so the machine isn't going to keep stopping and telling me, giving me that message that you're out of bobbin thread. But remember, if you were to adjust that, make sure that you switch your bobbin sensor back on. Now going down here, the machine speaker volume, say the little buzzing sound annoys you, you can lower it or you can make it louder. I always leave it at the default setting. Remember, default setting or factory setting is in a black box. I leave it at the factory setting because I like to know that when I touch the screen that the machine registered what I touched, and I know that it's going to react to that. But it's up to you. Okay, so now I'm going to go to page 2. So up here are general settings for your screen. If you want to customize your screen with a picture that you want to bring in, you can do that. This has nothing to do with the actual function of the machine. The next one down here, you can change the language on your machine. So if you want to put it into Spanish or Japanese or Dutch or German, I'm not sure if all those languages are in there, but there are a lot of languages in there. So you can change the language. Moving on here, now I can adjust my light. And you know, the factory setting is 5. I like to be able to adjust my lighting, and this is something that you may forget that you can do with this machine. I actually, if I'm embroidering at night, and maybe I'm embroidering on something that's really dark, maybe on a black fabric, you can get glare off that fabric, and it may be bothersome to you, or maybe you can't see the design as accurately as you want to see it. So I sometimes go in here and I dim my lighting, and then I can see my project clearer if it's dark. Okay, so the next one is your screen display brightness. I normally leave that at factory setting, but you can certainly dim it if the light is bothering you. And then the sensor function calibration, I'm going to skip over this for right now. That has to do with the sensor pen that comes with the machine, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. Okay, let's go on to the next page. So here, this is the settings of the machine, the actual settings of the machine. So coming down here, this tells me how many stitches I have on my machine. So this is something that the service department could possibly look at. This here is the number of this particular machine. That's the number that is specific to your machine. And then down here, we have the version of these machines, of this machine. So I'm going to show you in a minute how you can update it. It is important that when you purchase a machine like this, that you go on to the BabyLock.com website, go to the page that's specific to your machine, so search for the Pathfinder, and you'll find that there's information there, and one of the tabs that you can open up is updates. There are updates available for the machines, not all the time. I'm not saying that you're going to be updating your machine every month, but occasionally they come out with an update that's important to the machine, and there's no charge for an update. Often people get confused between updates and upgrades. Upgrades are available for purchase when they're available. This machine actually right now does not have an upgrade available for it. Updates are free off the website. And what updates do is they add or correct small issues with the machine maybe. In this case, there is an update available for the Pathfinder up to 5.01, I believe. And what that update does, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, is that it makes the machine open to accepting BabyLock's new 5x7 magnetic frame. That's a new optional frame. Okay, let's move on to the next page. So this is my embroidery frame display. So I can toggle through here, and you can see that the measurements and the settings of my screen change here. So what am I doing here? Say I wanted to embroider something and use my 5x7 hoop. I could come into the settings here and select the embroidery frame display for my 5x7. So I'm just quickly going to leave the settings just for one moment because I want to show you what it actually does. I'm going to close out. I'm just going to go in here and I'm going to select quickly a design and set it. Now you can see on my screen that I have a line, a visual line here. So that's my visual for reference, that if I want to use my 5x7 hoop, don't take your design and move it past there because now it won't fit. So visually it's helping me to place my embroidery design. I'm going to go home one second and I'm going to go back into my settings and I'm going to pick up where I dropped off. So my embroidery frame display helps me to visualize, and you can see I can set it if I want to have a center point. So this is something that I change quite often. Next we have name of color. So when you select an embroidery design and you take it through to embroidery, you'll find that the machine tells you the color stitch out, and we're going to look at that in a minute. But I like, and I find that many embroiderers like, that the name of the color be named. In other words, if it's a turquoise blue, the machine tells me turquoise blue. If it's a royal blue, it says royal blue. It doesn't give me a series of numbers that's particular to a brand, a specific brand of thread. A lot of us embroiderers, we have all kinds of assortments of different brands of embroidery thread. So I like to grab the color yellow that I want to do and not stay specific to a brand. So I kind of call that that I'm out of the box a little bit. So I leave mine as name of color. However, if you have a specific brand of thread that you like to stick with, you can come down here and you can change it to the color or the brand that you want. And I would need to change it from name of color to number, and then this window opens up And now I can select if I want Robinson Anton, or a particular, if I have sulky. If I want to just go back to name of color, I'm just going to go back to name of color. Okay, next down the line here, maximum embroidery speed. The maximum embroidery speed on this machine is 1,050 stitches per minute. Of course, when you select a design on this embroidery machine, it's going to slow itself down and pick up depending on the embroidery design. However, if I'm embroidering on a project and I want to be really careful, I want to be successful, I've maybe never embroidered on a towel before or something tricky, I will come in here and I am going to bring my embroidery speed down. I'm never in such a big rush that I think, oh, I've got to stitch it out at the maximum speed. So what I'll do often is I'll slow it down to 350, and then when I know as I move along the project that everything is working really well, my thread, my combination of my thread, my needle, my project, my stabilizer, everything is coming out well. Sometimes I stop the machine, open up my settings, come in here, and I can speed it up a little bit. Of course, the faster you go, the less time it's going to take to finish your embroidery design. But this is something that you definitely should be using, this feature. Okay, embroidery tension. The factory setting is 0, 0. That's what's in the black box. You want to be able, obviously, to adjust your embroidery tension in embroidery. So I'll give you an example of when I adjust my embroidery tension. If I use a metallic thread, something maybe that's a little, there's so many threads out there that you might want to try them and watch as it, always do a test. I say always embroider it. If you're not sure, embroider a test out first. And if you see your bobbin thread, say you have a pre-wound white bobbin, if you see your bobbin thread coming up and you're embroidering with red thread and you're seeing white bobbin thread coming up, what I do is I stop my machine, right? You're going to press stop. You're going to open up your settings and you're going to come in here. And if I see a lot of white thread, I may reduce my tension by -2. So what does that actually do? It loosens my red thread. So it has a loosening effect on the top, and it starts pulling, my bobbin thread will start going back down underneath where it belongs. Now, if you change your settings in this section of the machine, your embroidery tension settings, remember that if you switch your machine off and you come back tomorrow and you switch it back on and you're embroidering another project, these settings stay as is. It does not return to factory setting. So when you're finished with that particular project, come back in here and reset it to the original setting. Okay, the next one down, embroidery foot height. So you want your embroidery foot to travel as close as possible to your fabric or your project, but you don't want it to drag on your project. In other words, if I'm embroidering on a very thick or a heavy quilt maybe, or a towel or something that's heavy, and I see that if I see that my foot is traveling well and moving well on top of my project, I leave it. If I see that it's dragging and there's something, maybe you detect a noise or something, you may want to stop your machine and come in here and adjust your embroidery foot height. What that does is that it lifts your foot a little bit off your project so that you can be successful and your foot won't be dragging on that project. And you can also do it the other way around. If you are embroidering on something that's very, very fine, remember, the closer the foot rides on top of your fabric, the better the tension. So it may be something as simple as coming in here and lowering your presser foot so that it travels closer. Now, remember, when you're done with that project, to reset your settings back to factory settings. because you may not use your machine for a week, and when you come back you may detect a little noise or something. Sometimes if you raise your presser foot height a lot, and then the next project that you do or you embroider out is very fine, you may detect a little noise, like almost like a flapping noise, and that's your fabric. That if your embroidery foot is traveling too high, your fabric may be flapping a little bit underneath it, and sometimes you can hear that. So if you hear a noise that's new to you, stop your machine, come into your settings. Okay, let's move on here. We're on to, oops, I'm going to put it back to factory. Okay, factory is 1.5. Okay, so now we are on page 6 of 7. So here, you can set what the initial mode of your screen wants to be. And that, again, doesn't affect the function of the machine at all, so I never do anything with that. So this next section here, embroidery background color. This is kind of fun to play with. You know, we have customers that maybe your favorite color is purple, so I want my screen to be purple. And so let me go quickly and I'll show you what that means, what that'll do. Now when I come in and I select a design, my screen is purple. So if you select an embroidery design, you may or may not see it as well. However, if you are embroidering on a project that's purple, you may want to change your embroidery background color to purple so that you can visualize it better on that color. So it's up to you. That's not a setting that I use a lot, but it's there. I'm going to take it back to white, and I'm going to close that back. And then this next one underneath that setting changes the color of your little thumbnails, so to speak, where your embroidery designs are. Now this one here, I always change to large. This is the size of my thumbnail size. You have the option of having it small or large. I always like it large so I can see it better. And then on page 7, you have the option of being able to select metric or inches. And then the embroidery basting distance. This is a feature on this machine that I use quite often on my machine. A basting frame, which when we get to embroidery, I'm going to show you that button that adds the basting frame. A basting frame, basically, once you have selected your embroidery design and brought it through to embroidery, before you actually press start and start embroidering, you can add a basting frame. And so the machine, the very first step it's going to do before embroidering the design is it's going to stitch around the design a large basting frame in a basting stitch. So the settings, I have the ability in my settings to, if I want, to bring my basting frame closer than the default setting, so I could bring my basting frame closer to my embroidery design. Because effectively what my basting frame is doing is that it's stitching through my fabric to my stabilizers, so it helps to hold everything, my fabric, taut in my hoop so that I have less of a chance of having puckering around my embroidery design. The other thing that it does really well, it functions well for, is that if you're embroidering on a towel and you want to use a clear topper on top of your towel to hold down that nap so you don't get pokies through your embroidery design, you can put your stabilizer in your hoop, your towel, and then you can put your topper on top and select the basting frame, and it'll stitch the topper down to your towel, to your stabilizer, and now it holds it, everything taut in place, and now you can start to embroider. Okay, this is something that normally the embroidery basting distance, I normally leave it at factory setting. You need to be aware that it's possible that if you bring your embroidery basting distance too close to your embroidery design, you don't want to stitch over that basting frame. So I usually leave that at the factory setting of 5. Okay, the very last feature here I'm going to go over in a minute in another little segment. It's the embroidery foot with the LED pointer adjustment. Now let's talk embroidery and embroidery editing. I have my home screen pulled up here, and I have embroidery up here and embroidery edit. So in embroidery, if I was to select embroidery, you can see that all my thumbnails are blue. In this section of the machine, in embroidery, you can't change or edit anything. So generally, I'm going to go home again. You want to go into embroidery edit because all the same designs that are in here, but in here you have the ability to change or edit, whether it's to size, rotate your design. You're able to do that in here. So just touch embroidery edit and you can see right away that my thumbnails are orange as opposed to blue. That's a giveaway that you're in the right section. Okay, so once I open up my embroidery edit, I have different categories that I can select. First of all, I've got BabyLock exclusive designs behind this window. I have more built-in embroidery designs here. I have monograms, I have fonts, I have frames, I have bobbin work here. And here I have my memory pocket if I wanted to pull designs out that I've saved previously, I would go there. Here is my USB connectivity, so if I wanted to bring in a design that I maybe purchased online, I would put my USB stick in my machine, select this, and it'll pull up my files. This one here, this thumbnail here, is my computer. The machine comes with a USB connectivity cord to my computer, so I could connect it direct if I wanted to. So let's start by coming up here and opening up the exclusives. So when I open up that category, I have more categories, and behind every one of these are designs. So let's start by opening Kids Corner. So when I touch that, I immediately know that I have the option of 2 pages of kitty designs. So say I like this frog. I touch it with my stylus and immediately it pulls the frog up on my screen. Now coming down here, you can see I have like a little magnifier almost. If I touch that, it tells me, it gives me the options of different hoop sizes. So this is something that you can look at if you want. You don't have to. But if I want to magnify it, this is where my plus magnifier is. So there's my design in all its glory, the little frog. So once you've finished looking at your design, when you've opened something, close it out. Down below here, it immediately gives me my stitch out, and it tells me this is what is called the preview window. This is the machine telling me this is the first thing I'm going to stitch out. And what is that? That's the little chest. So it's telling me if I want the chest to be the color that it is in my picture, it's recommending the color orange. And it also tells me how many minutes it's going to take to stitch out that design. And there is the order of my stitch out, 6 minutes, 2 minutes. And we were talking about the color library before, and you see it just tells me, it doesn't give me an indicator of any kind of brand of thread. I want the machine to tell me what color: orange, white, lime green, leaf green, olive green, dark brown. So down below here, it tells me the size of my design. The height of my design is 3.17, and the width of my design is 3.78. The only other editing feature that I can touch that's available to me right now in this screen is I can select that, and you can see that it darkens, and all that does is that it mirror images it horizontally. So if I want to turn if you were maybe embroidering a fish and the fish was pointing to the left and you want the fish to point to the right, you could mirror image it here. Okay, so now let's move forward in our embroidery. So generally, bottom right of the screen, here it says set, you're moving forward in your embroidery. On the bottom left, you're returning or you're adding. So you're going backwards, so to speak, if you want to call it that. So I want to set this design. This is what I want to do. So I'm going to touch set. And now it takes me into my editing screen. Editing means change. So over here, it's going over again the size of the design. You see here, these little numbers, 3.17 is the height, 3.78 is the width. And then below it, I have 0.00, and there's an arrow up and down, 0.00, and there's an arrow going sideways. What does that mean? It means that if I move, these are my little move keys, if I move my design to the left, this number here, the one that has the arrow to the left, is changing. So that's how far I'm moving my design to the left horizontally away from my center. If I was to move it up, the vertical number is changing. Why would I want to know that? Maybe I want to have two frogs and I want to place them on the same side of the screen, the same distance from the center. I want to place one to the left, I want to place one to the right, and I want the same distance from the center point. So this is where I would look, moving it from the center horizontally and moving it from the center vertically. Now, if I want to center my design again, I can just touch the center here and it moves it back to the center. And you can see here that I have a little cross in the center of my frog. That's the center of my embroidery design. So in other words, whenever you pull up a design, it's going to automatically center it in your hoop. So now let's travel down a little bit more. This is size. If I touch size, I can size it up proportionately about 20%. And it'll stop. That little double boom that you heard, it's like a little double knock. That means I'm maxed out, I can't size it any bigger. And when you size it down proportionately, it's also going to stop you. This little white square here is a reset button. So if you're playing with your design, sizing it up and down, and you decide, you know what, I'm just going to go back to the original, I just want the original size, just touch your little square here and it'll reset it to the original size. So I'm finished sizing, so I'm going to close out my sizing. I can rotate it. I can rotate 1 degree, 2 degrees, I can rotate 10 degrees, I can rotate 90 degrees. And what I want you to notice is that on top of my rotation degrees is this little number here, 12, I'm going to take it back to reset, is the degree of rotation that I have rotated my design. So in other words, if I rotate it 10 degrees, it indicates you've rotated it 10 degrees there. And again, reset means just bring it back to the original setting. So the next one along is my color library. In this one, starting up here, it's telling me the first thing I'm going to stitch out in my preview window is the orange. If I want to travel through my color stitch out, down here I have a spool that says minus and a spool that says plus. So if I touch plus, it takes me to the next element of my design that it's going to stitch out. Maybe you're confused with what the stitch out order is or what it's going to stitch next. You can travel through your stitch out here. So it's going to do the orange first, which is the chest, the white eyes, and then it's going to go to the lime green, the little legs and the face. So I can travel through color by color. If I want to go backwards, go backwards. So this is something that I like to do. I don't like surprises, so I like to double check. I like to know what's coming next. And if I'm not sure, I would definitely do that. Now, there's another feature to this. If I wanted to visualize the little frog's chest in a different color, while it's selected, I could come to my color library and say, you know what, I don't have that particular orange, maybe I want blue. So in my color library here, I selected a blue, and it pulls it up, and I can immediately see what it looks like if I stitched out, if I wanted a different color stitch out. And if I want to reset it, I can just reset it, and it asks me, is it okay to revert to the previous color changes? And I'm going to say okay. So if I wanted to, I could travel through to the other colors, and I could change them as I go, or you could leave them alone. Okay, so now let's close out. I'm just going to travel back to the beginning where I have my little orange chest. I'm going to close out, and we're going to keep moving on. Okay, so that was your color library. The next one I have is continuous embroidery. So this is kind of cool. I'm going to place my frog a little bit higher in my screen to show you this feature. This is a feature that is almost fun to play with, because there's different things that you can use it for. Okay, so I'm going to select this button, and right away factory setting comes up that it selects the continuous embroidery in a vertical setting. So what does that mean? I have the option here, because I don't want to change that. I'm going to leave it selected as vertical, but I have the option of touching plus on top or plus on the bottom. I pulled my design all the way to the top, so I'm going to select plus to the bottom. And what it does is that it places a second embroidery design directly below my original embroidery design. So this design is small enough that I could actually fit 3 of them. And so now look at what I've got, and they're directly in line. So you don't have to worry about spacing and all of that. Okay, so coming along here, just like I have plus to the top, plus means add to the top, add to the bottom, I have minus on the top and minus to the bottom. So if I press minus, I'm saying take away my bottom design. Maybe I want to move those 2 to the center. And now my next option is I can stretch them apart. So what I do once I stretch it, you see how it's moving the bottom one away? If you want to keep it centered, stretch it apart and then recenter it. And now I've got 2 little frogs with a space in between. So that stretches them apart. This one places them back together. So if I want to squeeze them tight together, I can do that. And of course here I've got a reset button. Reset in this case means reset it to my original one. So now I've got my one little frog. And if I want to center it, again, I can do that. So let's pull up something else that I'll be able to visualize easier with you. I am going to select something a little smaller. I always say the hardest thing, I want a little design. There, maybe this one. Okay, I have a little, can you see that on screen? I have a little monkey on a bicycle. Yes, you can see that on screen. I'm just going to come back in here. And again, you should come in here and play with this, because you're not going to hurt the machine. I know that sometimes when you're playing with buttons or features that you're not familiar with on a machine, we tend to be hesitant and not want to touch buttons. Well, you're not going to hurt anything by touching all of these. So remember I told you this one comes up default as vertical. If you select horizontal, and now my selection underneath comes up horizontal, I can add to the right. So just like I did it vertically, I can select horizontally. I can stretch them apart. I could actually move them up. And now I could come back here to vertical and I could add to the bottom, and now I've got 6 of them. So the other thing is when you play with this and you decide that that's what you want to embroider, when you take it through to embroidery, what this machine does that's really a nice high-end feature is that it color sorts. Can you see here on my stitch out that it says flesh pink, flesh pink, flesh pink, 1 minute, 1 minute, 1 minute? So to save you time, the machine is actually going to stitch out all the little faces. So you're going to put your flesh pink color on, or whatever color you want to put on, and instead of having to keep changing your thread that the machine stitches every monkey individually, it's going to stitch all the faces for you. And then it'll probably stitch all the shirts. So if you want blue shirts on all of them, you just put blue on. That's what color sorting means. It's going to stitch out everything in that same color so that you have to change your thread less, which saves time, obviously. Okay, I'm going to go home. I'm going to go back to my main embroidery screen and cover another feature. So let's come into quilting. It's got some really nice quilting designs for quilt blocks. It's got a nice assortment of designs, this machine. So you can scroll through. I'm actually going to go back to this one. You can see that I've got only 3 colors on this design. I'm going to go ahead and set it. I'm going to go ahead and go through to embroidery to show you another feature. This little blue spool with some dotted lines underneath, if I was to select that, watch what happens up here. Do you see how my color stitch out of red, green, and gold, it all turned gray? Effectively, what I just did by selecting this is that I eliminated color thread stops in between those 3 colors. So if I'm a quilter and I want to do red work or black work and I want that whole design to stitch out in one color, I select this and the machine is not going to stop between colors. I have done away with the color stops. So that's a really cool feature to use too. Let me go back home and I'm going to open up my embroidery edit, and let's go a little bit further here. I'm going to open up my fonts. So when I select fonts, I've got an exclusive script, and then I have more fonts here. These are tiny, tiny little fonts and fonts in another language. So I'm going to keep it very easy. I'm just going to select the first font. As soon as you select a font, uppercase font gets selected, but I have tabs along here that I can select for numbers, for punctuation marks, and foreign languages. So let's go back to our uppercase. So as soon as I select a font underneath that tab, my options for editing or for changing it light up underneath. So first of all, I have large, medium, or small, and remember that it immediately tells you the size of the font of that letter right here, the height. So as I travel along, you can see what size that font is. So now if I wanted to lowercase, I could select B, and again I have options down here. So say I select a word moving along here, I have the option that I can arc it. You can see how easy it is to just select these buttons and see what it does. I can tighten an arc, I can open up an arc, I can array them in a different line, I can reset them to a straight. So again, very, very easy. I can do a spell check here. I can delete if I want. So on my screen here, the letter D is selected. So if I want to delete it, it's going to delete. If I decide that that's what I want to do, I can set it, and now it takes me into my editing screen. And so whenever you select a font or an embroidery design, whatever is lit up is an option. If it's grayed out, it's not an option for that design. So I have the opportunity again to size my design. I have the opportunity to rotate it if I want. I can change the colors. Change it back to black. Let's reset it. I love that it gives you the little message, just in case you touch the screen accidentally. It gives you a little message like, is it okay to do this? Like, did you really want to do this? And then you just say okay and you agree with the machine. Okay, multicolor. When you're in fonts, the machine immediately assigns fonts the color black, and it's going to stitch it out all in the same color. But if I want those to be all different colors, my ABC, if you touch multicolor, it assigns them an individual color. So now I could go into my color library and say, you know what, I want my letter A to be red. Maybe you're doing a children's quilt, and I'm going to leave B as black, but I want C to be yellow. So selecting multicolor detaches the letters, so to speak, and allows you to have color changes in between. Okay, let's go back one more time. I'm going to come back into Embroidery Edit. I'm going to go into my exclusives, and I think that I'm going to go back in, let me see what Home Accents has. I want to select a little design. No, not that. You know what? I'm going to go back to Kids Corner, and I'm going to select a small design. I know in my children's category my designs are smaller, because I want to show you this last little button here that I use a lot on my machine. It's super cool and super easy. So when I touch that, it duplicates my design. So I can actually, with my stylus, come to my screen and drag my designs. And if I want another one, I can touch that again. And I can also travel through the elements of my design on my screen. And so if I want to edit each one individually, say I want to rotate that one just a little bit, I can select it and the red box is around it, and I can rotate that one a little bit. And maybe that one here, I want to delete it. I'm going to delete that. That's too many little cars. I think that what I'm going to do instead is add. When you select add, it brings you back to this screen, and now I can select and add lettering to my embroidery design. You can go back as many times as you want and add. So this is where you would do that. You touch add, you go back to your embroidery screen, and if you had something on a USB stick, you could pull in something from a USB stick. But you see, now you can start creating. I could go to my color library, change the colors of my car, or if I'm ready and that's what I want to do, I can just go through to embroidery. And so this is my last screen. This is where I would actually, if I'm ready to embroider, I would put my foot down and press start. Up here, the screen is telling me that this design has 30,039 stitches. It's going to take 50 minutes to stitch out, and there's going to be 15 color changes. Remember that you've got a very easy needle threader. So when you change the color of your thread, it's very fast. I have the opportunity still down here to move my design around in the screen. I can still rotate. I showed you this. This eliminates your color stops. And then previously we talked about the basting frame. This is my basting frame. Remember, we talked about it in the settings that I can adjust the distance of my basting frame and move it away from my design. Now you can see on my design that I have a black box around it. So, and you can see that on my preview window, it's telling me here that the first thing I'm going to stitch out is the basting frame, and that's going to stitch my fabric to my stabilizer and help me to avoid puckering. Maybe I'm not a very good hooper, or it might be a little loose. So basting frames are always popular to have. Now watch what happens when I deselect that. My basting frame goes away from my preview window, and the machine is telling me the first thing I'm going to stitch out is the white on the first design. Okay, my next little selection here is my sensor pen. I'm going to show you that in a minute. This here is a little thumbnail of the embroidery LED pointer light foot. So what does this machine have that makes it really special? I'm going to throw a hoop on the machine in a minute, and I'm going to show you how when I select this, the embroidery foot that's attached to the machine will drop a little LED pointer light in the center of my project. So it's going to help me with positioning, and it's going to also help me visually to see the trace of my design. So that again is a very cool feature to make embroidering easier for you and for you to be more successful. Okay, down along here I have return. If I wanted to return and delete a car, I could, or modify or add more, I could return. This here is my tension. So when you adjust your tension in this section of the machine, what it's doing is only adjusting the tension for this particular embroidery design. If you adjust the tension in your settings, that stays in the machine until you change it back to the factory setting. But here, it only will affect the tension for that particular embroidery design. Down here, you have the color, the end color trim and jump stitch trim. I would recommend that you don't touch that. What this has to do with is eliminating or not eliminating the little jump stitch between embroidery designs. This machine cuts your jump stitch. A jump stitch is when the machine travels from one design to another where it changes color. This machine will cut the stitch when it's finished with that color and travel to the next one. So I recommend that you leave this alone. If you do want to adjust your jump stitch trim or your end trim, I would refer to your manual to make sure that you understand what it is you're doing. Okay, this here, this is your trace, and again I'm going to show you, I'm going to throw a hoop in the machine and show you what this does and what this little button does. This basically shows you the positioning of your design in your hoop. So I have selected a letter from my fonts, and as you can see down here in the screen, I have selected the basting frame and it has added it around my letter. Up here in my preview window, it's showing that the first thing it's going to stitch out is my basting frame. The other thing that I did was I selected my little LED drop light, and so now we are ready to embroider. And it is telling me on my screen here that it's going to be a minute for the basting frame and a minute to stitch out my letter. So now let's move over to the hoop. I have a piece of fabric hooped here, and right here I have marked the spot or the center of where I want to place my embroidery design. And you can see that up here my little LED drop light is there. So I want to move that down here and position my letter down there. So I can do that by either grabbing my letter and pulling it down on my screen, and then to fine tune, if I want, I can also use the arrows on my screen to position it. Okay, so I've got my little drop light right in the center, so that's where it's going to embroider the letter A. You can see on the screen here that my letter A has a little green cross. That's exactly where that little LED drop light is. Okay, so now what I want to do is touch this. This is called a trace button. And I have a couple of options here. Right now the machine is telling me I'm in the center of the embroidery design. And down here I have a little trace button. So first of all, let me touch that. And what the machine is showing me now is that's the outline of the letter A, and then it travels back to the center. If I want to see that in slow motion, so to speak, because it went a little bit fast for me and I want to be a little bit more exact, I can come back to my screen and tell my machine, you know what, show me again where the top left of my embroidery design is. And you can see here that my little green cross moved to the top left. And now I want to see top right. So in other words, I can do the trace in slow motion. And so now I can be really precise, and then I'm going to bring it back to the center and I'm going to close out of there. So now that I have my embroidery design in position, I'm going to put my presser foot down. I get the green light. I'm going to press start and I'm going to embroider. So that's my basting frame. The machine stops. I'm going to go ahead and put my presser foot back down, press start again, and it's going to embroider my letter. When I'm done with my embroidery, I always, of course, need to remove my basting frame. And you'll notice if you're looking at the screen of your machine that the little green cross on your screen is traveling with your needle around the embroidery design. Wherever the needle is at is where your little green cross is on your screen. So you can watch the progress of your machine. And we're almost done. And it is perfectly placed. So now I want to give you a little tip when using your basting frame. You'll notice when the machine starts to stitch your basting frame in the top left corner, it makes about 3 or 4 little locking stitches, and then it'll start moving towards the right with the basting stitches. If your stitches don't lock, which can happen, what I do when using my basting frame in the design is I take my bobbin thread out of my bobbin case and then I drop it back in. This is just a little tip for you to be successful. You bring your thread up the hill and down the valley, and when it comes around to here, this is where there's a little blade where generally you would tug your thread and cut it. Don't cut your thread. Just put your bobbin case back on and leave a tail to your thread. I would say at least 2 inches is good. Then go ahead and slide your hoop in and press start, and you'll find that your locking stitches lock every time and your basting frame will be successful. Okay, now we're going to calibrate the sensor pen that comes with your machine. And I am going to go to the settings to do that. But first of all, I need to plug in my sensor pen into the little outlet or hole that's on the end of my machine. So plug it in and then come over here and come to your settings. Open up your settings. Then you're going to travel to page 3. And there's my sensor function calibration, and it has a little picture of your sensor pen. So now I'm going to go ahead and select plus, and it says to me, is it okay to automatically lower the presser foot? And I'm going to say okay. So now I have another message that says touch the first point using the sensor pen as indicated. So it's showing to me in this little diagram that the first point is quite near to the bobbin case. This is a picture of my needle here and my throat plate. And then the second point is a little bit further forward. And you can actually, this one actually is very obvious. It's a little green dot on your embroidery arm. So first of all, I'm going to take my pen over to the first dot and touch it. And you need to hold the pen like you would normally hold it if you were going to use this function. So now I'm going to come over here and I see my first little dot here, and you can hear it made a little noise like a little beep, so the first touch registered. And now on my screen it says touch the second point using the sensor pen as indicated. So I'm going to come back over and I'm going to touch the second point. Press OK or touch the point again using the sensor pen. I'm going to touch OK, and now my sensor pen is calibrated. So once you've calibrated your sensor pen in your settings, you're going to take your sensor pen, and now I'm going to show you how to use it for embroidery, for positioning an embroidery design where you want it. So first of all, I have my name selected here. I'm keeping it very simple. And I'm going to come, I brought it through to embroidery. Now I'm going to touch sensor pen. And it asks me, it's always going to ask you this, is it okay to revert to the original position and or angle? Basically what the machine is telling you here is that it wants to bring my embroidery design to the center of my screen and position it straight as a starting point. So I'm always going to say okay to that. Okay, tells me the carriage of the embroidery unit will move. Keep your hands away. I'm going to say okay. So my hoop has moved forward, and now I have another message. It says select an on-screen key to indicate the center or the side position where you want the embroidery area. In my case, what I'm doing is I marked on my straight line that's in my hoop, I marked the center. In other words, I want to position my name in the center of this line where I marked the X, so to speak. So once you've read your message, just go ahead and say okay. Now it tells you, use the sensor pen to set the position and angle of the pattern on fabric in the order indicated. So it's asking me to first of all touch the center of my embroidery design, and then once I've done that, so I'm going to go ahead and come over to my hoop, and you can see here I have a line selected here, and this is the center. So I'm going to touch the center, and that registered, and now on my screen I have the little number 1 has turned red, which is indicating that it's registered. So now it wants me to select position number 2, which is the angle of the pattern. You can see that if you wanted to embroider a name and you draw your line and you hooped it crooked, this setting compensates for that. So now the second one I'm going to touch is up here, and it's the angle. So it's registered that both number 1 and number 2 are red. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to touch OK, because I know that that's how I want it. And I'm going to say OK, and the machine jumps into position. So now the needle is positioned exactly over my center X in my hoop. And you can see that it's taken it and moved my name and also rotated it to the angle of my embroidery design with my second marking is what did that. So now all I would need to do is put my presser foot down and press start, and it will embroider it with the A, just as in the picture over here, the embroidery design that I already did. I'm just going to slide it out so that you can see, because I duplicated it exactly. So it stitched my A exactly over the center and changed the angle of my embroidery design so that it's lined up on my line. Now I'm going to show you how to update your machine. Go to the babylock.com website, go to Pathfinder, and go to your updates. We've loaded the update onto a USB stick from the computer, and we've also printed off a PDF file. So if you've never done this before, it is not hard to do. The instructions are there, and I have them in my hand as to how to do this. Now, this particular update, it tells me when I print off the PDF what this version, which is 5.1, which is higher than what my machine is actually at. This machine is actually at 4.01. This is going to have the machine recognize the optional magnetic frame that BabyLock just came out with. And if you haven't seen this, it really is a nice frame to have for your machine as an optional frame. So by updating my machine now, it can be this EMF 180 is the number of the style of the new frame. Now it can be recognized on the machine. So first of all, I have the update on my USB stick here, and I've put it into the machine. You need to switch your machine off, put your USB stick in there with the update on there, and then turn your machine on. And as you're turning it on at the same time, press your needle threading button, and then as soon as it comes on, you can release that, and now I have a totally different screen. So this is my update screen. So I actually am going to update it with my USB, so I'm going to touch USB, and it says press load after connecting the USB media containing. I have already put it in, so I'm going to touch load. So it's saving the upgrade file. Do not turn the main power to off. So in other words, you can see my start stop button is flashing orange over here, and my update is loading, and this message is telling me I'm working on this. Do not turn me off right now. So depending on how big the update is, it can take a couple of minutes. Some updates have more fixes or additions than others, but we're just going to wait for it to do it. We are at 8% of 100%, and it's counting here. And while it's doing that, let me just show you this again. Magnetic hoops are very, very popular for embroidery. Why? Because you won't get hoop burn. One of the reasons, because it's very easy also to reposition your project without maybe removing your hoop. So they're actually very popular, and I love that BabyLock is bringing out different sizes and updates so that you can keep your machine up to date. And actually, it's always good to keep your machine up to date, whether you want this optional frame or not. I would still keep my machine updated. So the update is complete. Tells me on my screen. So now I'm just going to go ahead and switch my machine off. I'm going to take my USB stick out and I'm going to switch it back on. I hope you enjoyed this instructional video on the BabyLock Pathfinder embroidery only machine. If you have any questions, please be sure to stop by our store or give us a call. We're here to help you. The machine is available in store or online at sewing.net. Happy embroidering!